the name of this particular class, Inside Out, you gave kind of your Buddhist interpretation of it. I have another interpretation
Please.
of it, and I find it fascinating that in the examination of the mind, that we have a object out there, and what we perceive is the conceptual impression of that object without any judgment, without the stereotypes that you mentioned. Then in fact we're getting what we in Buddhism would consider a realistic impression of that object rather than distorted with all of the various stereotypes and all. And so this is a way of working inside out, meaning working on our mind, training our mind to be less judgmental and critical, creating stereotypes of others. So it's a training from the inside out. But what I find you describing is actually an experience, an experiential that you're building into your program that is in some ways working outside in. Meaning that the dialogue, the experience is actually allowing the students to see that they have these interjections to the true impression of the other. So that, to me, it is the beauty of your program's name, because it captures, this facet that I see in it, and certainly it brings so much depth to the spirituality part of it.
I love what you said about outside in.
Yeah.
I really like that, because this goes to this book that I just wrote on this philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas.
What is the name of the book? Is called Emmanuel Levinas?
Well, the book that I wrote is called Other Others.
Okay.
And so in the humanities today, everybody talks about the other. You've probably heard that, right? The other. And the other, and people talk about the social construction of the other, how the other is socially constructed, this sort of thing. And the other is somebody who's different from you, racially different, nationally different, sexually different, sexual preferentially different, and so on. And for Levinas, this idea of the other, that this idea of difference doesn't really get to it. It doesn't really get to it. That the other is rather, as you put, the outside coming in, something radically outside that comes and explodes your categories, your the way in which you've narrowed your conception of the world, and explodes that. You don't necessarily want that to happen because you want to protect yourself and so on. So, and for him, it's this otherness that explodes categories, and you experience this otherness not as a category, but through a responsiveness. And he uses this word responsibility for the other. And he uses, and it's written in French, so responsabilité. So it's not our, I don't want to put a political label on, but you have to be responsible in this sort of very conservative, but ability to respond to the other. And in French as well, to answer for the other. That is, that you are connected to the other, but the other is actually radically other than you. So it's not so I don't know whether I'm losing my train.
Well,
My
instead
train
of
of
saying,
so my book. That's what I was going back to. Why? So I'm using this word other than the way it's usually used today. We say the other. Someone has been othered or whatever. But this is this other notion of otherness, in which the way you experience the other is not through thinking about the other, but through responding to the other, being responsible for the other, being infinitely responsible for this other. And then, so that's what I mean by other, rather. But in the second way was to see Levinas himself. He was a Holocaust survivor. His whole family was murdered in the Holocaust, and his work really comes out of that world. He didn't really have much interest in spiritual traditions outside of the Judeo-Christian tradition, although he did make a statement which I use as the epigraph to this book, which is that, see if I can articulate it precisely, there is nothing in any great spirituality that would be absent, would not be present in another great spirituality. So what I mean, so he has this, to me, this very arresting view of otherness. But since the roots, as it were, of where this came from is out of Western philosophy and the Judeo-Christian tradition, I was interested in looking for equivalent figurations from other traditions outside. In Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, or early Chinese thought, or in Islam, for example. So that's what I mean by others in the book, is looking at this notion of the other, which he developed outside in, as you put it so well, and looking at this other notion of otherness, not as a social construction, not as a construction, but that which actually disrupts your thinking. This is something coming from the outside that explodes it. And then looking for this other idea of otherness in traditions other than the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. So that's what I mean by other. So to me, that kind of goes to what the center is trying to do.